Welcome everyone to Word Soup. This is our annual poetry reading. This is one of our first just in-person poetry readings, so welcome. And thank you for the CTL for sponsoring and the English department. My name is Professor Gina Barnard, and here with Traci Gourdine, professor, poet, friend, mentor. So let me get started with the American River College Indigenous Land Statement. We acknowledge the land which we occupy today as the traditional home of the Maidu and Miwok tribal nations. These sovereign people have been the caretakers of this land since time immemorial. Despite centuries of genocide and occupation, the Maidu and Miwok continue as vibrant and resilient federally recognized tribes and bands. We take this opportunity to acknowledge the generations that have gone before, as well as the present day Maidu and Miwok people. And so Traci is a star here in Sacramento, and so I'm actually going to read your whole bio, if you want to sit. So Traci Gourdine's poetry and stories have been published in numerous literary magazines, and she's been anthologized within Shepard and Thomas's Sudden Fiction Continued. Traci and Quincy Troop were paired in a year-long exchange of letters for the anthology Letters to Poets, Conversations about Poetics, Politics, and Community. She is co-editor of Night is Gone, Day is Still Coming, an anthology of writing by young Native writers, as well as We Beg to Differ, poems by Sacramento poets against the war. She has also co-edited the Tully Review with Luke Wright for the Sacramento Poetry Center. She is a professor of English here at American River College and has chaired the creative writing department for the California State Summer School for the Arts from 1998 to 2013. She was chair of the Sacramento Poet Laureate Committee for 3 laureate terms, and for 10 years she has facilitated writing workshops within several California state prisons in the Arts and Corrections program for the William James Association. Her recent collection is Bringing in the Wild out of Ad Lumen Press. And thank you so much for being here, Traci.
Hi everybody, it's so good to be back in the old Rave Hall, you know. We used to do it, there used to be sinks or something. I guess that's the other one. We used to do poetry readings over the sink. But thank you CTL for having us and Gina for putting it together, especially when your household was in absolute chaos at the time. It's been a while, you know, 2 years of this. And usually now that, you know, when you do a reading, you really don't know, unless there's a specific venue, what you're going to read. So you bring enough so that you can read the room, you know, and see like what'll work. I think what I'm going to do is start off with reading a little bit from Letters to Poets, Conversations about Poetics, Politics, and Community. I was paired up with Quincy Troop, who at the time of the writing of these letters was wrapping up the writing of the text, The Pursuit of Happiness, which was then later turned into the film with Will Smith. So he was writing that at the time. And so our exchange of letters, finally, you know, I guess it was the last time that I wasn't considered the elder. He was the elder writing to the young poet. So I'm going to read a little bit from that, and then pair it with the poems that kind of, you know, show an example of what I was talking about. Hey Quincy, this was written in 05. I can't tell you how many times I've reached for jazz in order to get to the soul of a poem I am writing. In silence I may hear whispers or pick up a hazy, shadowy someone moving along the street. But as soon as I put some jazz on, suddenly there's a woman in a red dress measuring herself in a mirror while her small sister looks on. The whispers become a crisp and clear narrative of a piano player limping home after an all-night gig, wishing he had made it to Paris in his youth. I can see the rain-slicked streets, the floor in a tenement, and even hear a baby crying down the hall. For some reason, jazz takes me back to all that is familiar to me. Somehow I find my way home again. And when I say home, I mean back to my origins, the women in my family who sang a few lines of a song when all other words wouldn't do. My father crooning Moody's Mood for Love whenever my mother sucked her teeth and turned her back to him. And the crystal clear memories that never fail to come at the first few notes of Bird, Monk, Miles, Brubeck, or Coltrane. My father had a huge reel-to-reel that ran most evenings while he was in his den, smoking a cigar. The music seemed endless, but of course I took it for granted. Jazz was as solid and as constant as the family around me. But when it became time to define my own generation, I turned towards the popular music and left the old folks to their own. It's funny how we come back to the things that shaped our early memories. Jazz pleased me when I happened across it, but I didn't truly embrace it until I realized how essential it is to my creative spirit. I always worked off of pure imagination. When I began writing my first hesitant stories, I'd stare at people on the bus, on the street, and suppose about them. However, once I moved away from the East Coast and into the heat and weeds of Northern California, I didn't have the vibrant city space to inspire me. I found myself without the music of family, the cadence of speech and laughter, how shoulders move when dipping and dodging through the crowded avenues, the rhythms of the subway, rollicking on the tracks, and what sad notes can be heard on rainy Mondays. Popular music wasn't taking me anywhere near home because it was too new. So with some form of instinct, I found myself listening to a local jazz station to ease the blank of my imaginings. I found I had to compose with only instrumentals. Lyrics had me shaken from my chair and sing along. With just a sax, I had the tempo or mood I needed to complete a poem, and a piano helped me add texture to a setting that would otherwise appear flat. I believe jazz helped me through the toughest class in graduate school. I took a class that concerned itself with poetics. We read theory, critical analysis, and learned the terminology of poetics. It was deadly dull, and I could barely find anything very palpable that I could grasp or identify as my process. As the semester went on, I still felt as if I could not articulate my own poetics, how I come to image, how I frame my poems in line and rhythm. One day while commuting to the Bay Area, I played and replayed Miles' Sketches of Spain. Amazingly, I found myself drawing imaginary line breaks in the air as he played his horn. I understood the connection and the reasoning behind the manipulation and timing of the poetic line. It was a major breakthrough for me because I found an explanation for my purpose and process. People stalled in that traffic must have thought I was insane watching me draw a flurry of long and short lines in the air. I immediately experimented not only with lines, but I also fooled around with mimicking actual tunes by Bird and Davis. My work moved into new ground. I had more control of my process than ever before. Once the piece is written, I play it with my voice. Listening to the notes I've laid down, I then tune not only for meaning, but for the musicality of the thing. As with music, I feel that a poem also has emotional value by its sound and timing. I can hear when a word may stumble the piece by breaking the mood, or a line break is ruining the tempo. Once I have that down, I feel that the piece is complete and I can play it back with its original intent, no matter what the mood I'm in. I hope that makes sense. It sounds so obscure when writing it here. I know that jazz has played a major part in your work as well. Who or what influenced or changed your work the most? Have you had other outside influences as well? What do you reach for when a piece stalls out or you need a boost of inspiration? I'd also love to hear how you fine-tune a piece to your satisfaction. Again, hope this new year is going well for you and your travels were safe and serene. I look forward to hearing from you. And Quincy wrote me back, and he talked to me about the other influences of his, Garcia Lorca, Allen Ginsberg, Amiri Baraka, W.S. Merwin, Sylvia Plath, Leon Damas, Nicholas Guillaume, W.E. Yeats, Jean Toomer, Robert Hayden, Derek Walcott, Sterling Brown, on and on and on. He talked about a conversation that he had with Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison once told me when I asked what she did when her writing was blocked, she replied, "I'm supposed to be blocked. And no matter what and how much I might try to write through it, I've never been able to do it because I'm supposed to be blocked. So I just do something else, like listen to music or read a good book." That was Toni Morrison's response to his question. Yeah. Let's see. Here's a response to his. I'm truly inspired, Quincy, by all that you said. Your letter made me want to rush out to find Barry, Little Richard, and yes, the Platters. I remember the sounds of Masekela and Makiba too. You provided quite the shopping list with Rochereau, Manguana, Ndouar. I've laughed, nodded, and cheered right along with Etta James, and I find myself wanting more. So many of my fellow poets hold poetry in one hand while embracing another discipline in the other. Some even amaze me with their incredible abilities with poetry and music, poetry and painting, poetry and photography, poetry and bonsai and dance. Oh yes, poetry and baseball. When you wrote that Toni Morrison doesn't fight the block, but instead finds her study and outlet elsewhere, I recognize the sentiment. Aren't we as poets and writers working, whether or not we are seated and spilling ink? Photographers are seeing and composing, whether they have the lens in front of their eye, the same way a sculptor sees possibility in a snowdrift, the dancer in the steps of a harried waitress, the musician within the tease of hesitant rain in wind on leaves. I believe all artists are present and living within an inch of their lives in order to create. And I'm not referring to great risks of limb in a venture or booking tours through the 7 circles of hell, be it lifestyle or couplings to get one's work done. I'm referring to being present in the world and seeing the grand to the minuscule, starshine to pinprick, old oak to raw bud. Sometimes in this racket and routine, I must remind myself that I'm supposed to be listening, not speaking, receiving and not responding, feeling and not grasping. That brings me to how I've come to understand the natural world and how it's found a place in my work. I was insolent and bored when faced with Earth, having been raised on concrete half my life, with hardly a slit of sky visible above my head. I swore only pigeons and ragged blue jays claimed the sky. I was under the belief that life happened only if people and buildings were present. When I moved from the East Coast to Northern California, I had to be taught to see all over again, as well as learn the language, swollen river, ribbons of Tule fog, whitecaps in April sea, muddied old horse patient in rain. The change of landscape required that I had to learn a new way of seeing. Yeah. And then excerpt from the last letter that we shared. So much has gone on since we last talked. I enjoyed your last letter. It took me around the world. Today I watched the memorial of Coretta Scott King. It made me well up sometimes. It wasn't just the speeches or the soul-stirring choir that moved me. It wasn't the comforting tones from Maya Angelou or the rhythmic timbre of the preachers who praised her work that made me want to weep. It was the very atmosphere and the people in the pews who moved me most of all. I became homesick, terribly homesick, for the ladies in the big hats with slow, nodding heads and knowing smiles. I listened for the calls and responses that rippled in the air whenever someone spoke some truth, and how folks laughed and amened, just like any other good Sunday service. There was so much history in that church today. It took me back to when my dad wore shiny pants and a cocky hat with a tiny feather in its band. I can hear the music playing and smell hot combs warming on the stove for the weekly torture of little girl's hair. Who's on the radio? Ray Charles. He's singing and so are we. I remembered line dances. I saw Saturday night card tables littered with cards and beer bottles, bowls of potato chips and peanuts. I heard my mother's young laughter and the political talk about marches, church bombings, boycotts, and integration. I was very young at the time, but those days resonate in me tonight. It's amazing how the small moments of everyday people in my life work themselves with important landmarks of history. When I was a child, my father would sometimes entertain himself with a bit of shit disturbing. He was a physicist with his own company called Gourdine Systems, later known as Energy Innovations. In his free time, he loved to start debates with the most disparate characters he could scare up. He'd match folks up and step back to watch them go at it. Thinking back on it, it was his form of cockfighting. One of his favorite rivalries to watch existed between two men, my Uncle Skeets and Amiri Baraka, then known as Leroy Jones. My father would drive deep into Newark and bring Skeets up to the house where Leroy would be visiting and enjoying his peace. But when Skeets arrived, my father would introduce a hot topic and then step back to watch. Skeets was a loud, rambunctious, and extremely opinionated man. He prided himself on being a Negro and had little patience with its new turn of phrase, black. He was a card-carrying Republican, while Amiri was ready for a new consciousness. Oh, how they fought. My father would tip back his chair and laugh at their arguments. He'd laugh until tears came. Then he'd drive a sputtering, enraged Skeets home. One day, he and Skeets were driving through the streets of Newark when all of a sudden, Skeets demanded that my father stop the car. He sprang out of the car and ran up the street towards a line of ragtag men and young boys lined up military style at attention. Pacing back and forth in front of them was Amiri, being a drill sergeant, preparing the ranks for the revolution. As my father tells it, they looked like half a troop, but with squirrel rifles. Old men, the corner drunk, some restless teens, and a handful of true militants practiced their turns and presentations of arms. Skeets tried his hardest to disband them, yelling and cussing that their rusty old squirrel guns would only blow up in their faces. I can still hear my father's laughter as he told that story. Those were the early days of the Panthers, when they were just coming to be, and Amiri was introducing the party to the folks in Newark. I also recall when the cities burned and the police came to our home and surrounded it, believing that a bunch of radical Negroes had taken a house hostage. We lived in the suburbs then in West Orange, New Jersey, when the Newark riots broke out. My father had business associates over to the house for an afternoon party, but when the cab driver dropped off two white people and noticed the house was teeming with black folks, he called the police, stating that the Newark riots had spread. My father was trying to close a big business deal one moment, and the next, the SWAT team swarmed the outside of the house, aiming their guns at the heads of the black men. It was terrifying and a true sign of the times. My brothers, sisters, and I became so used to our cartoons being interrupted for days because of assassinations and funerals. Looking back on it now, the TV was constantly beaming turmoil. If a program was interrupted, it truly meant a good man had died. Kennedy, King, Malcolm, Medgar Evers. We saw dogs on short leashes backing young black women against walls, felt the force of fire hoses knocking people to the ground. All of it became common, but truly frightening to us. One night my parents were out, leaving us behind with a sitter. Halfway through the night, the TV was interrupted by a newscast stating that James Meredith, or Meredith, had been shot. My father's name is Meredith, and we being children took everything as literal. Oh, the howling that went on in that house. We swore every black father would be killed, and now ours had fallen too. Ironically, James Meredith's wife's name was June, same as my mother's. We thought for sure our world had been torn. It was terrifying, and yet historical time when everyday people were standing up for themselves and for each other at the risk of death. My parents and grandparents straddled a society steeped in blatant racism and oppression, while at the same time they experienced the breaking dawn of possibility. They could actually see the fists that beat down so many lies begin to unfurl and relent. They could see great opportunities for their own kids. How invigorating that view must have been. What is most interesting about that time is that no one thought they had to wait for a vote or an elected leader to make a noise, that something wasn't fair or equal. People simply stood up and said enough. I'm telling you these stories because how the Iraq War, Katrina, and Coretta's passing have made me look over my shoulder to see where we've all been and how much has been forgotten. I started writing poems centered around those times when people realized passivity could mean their death. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't sense the end of the passivity I feel around me. I try to rally my students, urging them to please pay attention to the irreparable changes taking place in our country. I tell them to get mad and claim the direction. Too many of them seem so numb to me, and there is no collective memory that allows them to see. Some barely recall Desert Storm, and only a smattering were breathing air when Vietnam ended. I feel as if I'm watching a terrible replay, but for many of my students, Iraq, the Supreme Court, and the destruction of the Gulf Coast's culture is just an incident that has no connection to them. Coretta's memorial on February 6th occurred on the same day that FEMA shut off the money to pay the hotels housing the scattered Gulf Coast victims. On that very day, thousands were evicted and officially went without an address. Therefore, they can no longer be counted. Something's wrong here, and I hope the young Leroy Jones are ready for a new consciousness. That's ironic because that cat from Tennessee, that senator, his last name is Jones, yes? Yeah. So what role do we play as poets in all of this? Emerson wrote, "Doubt not, O poet, but persist. Say it is in me and shall out. Stand there, balked and dumb, stuttering and stammering, hissed and hooted, stand and strive, until at last rage draw out of thee that dream power, which every night shows thee is thine own, a power transcending all limit and privacy, and by virtue of which a man is the conductive of the whole river of electricity." I wish I had said that. But it is better that I recognize the truth in it. When the world seems to tantrum like a baby neglected or creates tyrants and disease out of simpletons, isn't it true that the artists set to their most heaviest work? Like little machines, we get to churning, creating, and saying everything the news refuses to bear or what politicians divert our attentions from. While markets shove nonsense down our throats and our ears and on our backs, the artists and writers keep recording and warning, hoping the ship might turn. From what I know of history and times, the most unlikely of men and women have caught the reins to stop all sorts of wars, oppressions, and evils. Some are kings and rulers, but most are everyday civilians, tired of sitting still. Some were poets, some were painters and sculptors, and some were small-town preachers. But in all of them, there was a need to act, and they did. I'm just proud to be in the company of so many poets and artists who aren't afraid to write it down, speak out loud, and not care if their lights go out. It gives me hope. And that's where my rant is these days. I've been drawn away from my personal challenges to look up and see how troubled the country is. Now I've got my ear to the ground and I listen for the sounds of rising voices and determined footfalls moving toward yet another stand. letters, I mean, I think illustrate my poetics and what I look at and how I work and such. So we'll look at some of these pieces here that I had aligned with. This is called My Father and His Reel to Reel. Where we lived, there was no music like that. It came from my father's cigar smoke. The turn of his back in a chair and a soft static stirred the air at the turn of his reel to reel, playing Miles, Bird, Coltrane, and Dizzy. No one sang, they just blew, and it was moody sometimes, frantic, just like my father after a long day's journey into his night, managing business that would somehow fall and fail, and the rot of diabetes would begin to erode kidneys, blot out eyes, and a leg would get gone, the one he was tapping with, keeping time with, the turn and the turn. In my father's den back then, he was a full-on strider, had a reel-to-reel big as a hubcap that pulled brown ribbon into song. He'd close his eyes and be in that club with a small stage where the folks would crowd to hear the sound of hard times, beautiful, much more interesting than the Beach Boys on a 45, or the chatted up repeats off the AM radio. I enjoyed Cousin Brucey on WABC because I had to keep up at school. And Dad's sounds were grown folk sounds that came with whiskey, blue smoke, and muttered curses that were punctuated with a wild kind of laughter I never heard on a playground. I knew that the going coming off my father's reel-to-reel was steep. It came from having lived for a long, long time, and the quick calls, the clapping, the sound of bottles passing had a meaning my WABC self would have to wait to see, to live. But in time, I'd know to listen long after that reel-to-reel was gone. And this is my mother's worth. My mother's worth was in a tiny blue bottle, elegant haze of deep, deep blue brought back from her travels to France. Young as she was, married as she was to a hard-headed, too self-assured man, mother as she was to 4 back-to-back kids, she found herself in Paris, all on her own, by accident, and she smiled, did not apologize, as she left her husband behind in the airport because he thought she had his ticket, his passport, that she would carry him the way she carried her children's coats, wiped their butts, remembered their shoe left here and the other there, kept the dog off the couch, draped in iron sheets, cut the crusts off bread and hid vitamins in everyone's oatmeal because it was her job to be the doer, holder, getter, rememberer, even if she was a woman on her way to Paris. She left my father there sputtering in the airport. She smiled and waved her white gloved hand over her shoulder, said, "See you later, dear. Catch up with me when you can." In Paris, along the narrow beauty of the old within the tiny cafes and shops for 2 whole days, she carried her own coat and ate no oatmeal. I still have that tiny blue bottle of French perfume she found on that trip, the perfume that held the scent of what a woman can find on her own by accident in Paris. My parents are safely deceased, so this next piece might have had a little eyebrow raised, but here we go. This is called Love's Bloodless Coup. Did I ever tell you the story of how my mother stopped trying to please her man, my father? Did I mention that in all the years that I saw her in full revolt, that I had no idea I was witnessing a bloodless coup? It occurred in the 60s at the time of pastel dresses and little hats that looked like nice pastries, when women always wore pumps and spotless kid gloves to the grocery store. They smiled pleasantly, minded their men, never questioned the advice of doctors, preachers, policemen, or the logic of any man with the title Mr. It wasn't until I was grown, married, with 2 children of my own, that I realized how my mother, sitting in the dark, smoldering, and smoking a cigarette, eventually came up with a way to war with a man without raising her voice or slamming a door. She brought home a purebred German Shepherd puppy that came complete with pedigree papers. This pot-bellied, floppy-eared bundle rapidly grew to pure muscle and bark, was officially titled and registered as Mr. Gourdine. My mother named this dog after my father because he tended to wander. And despite her attempts at reason, debate, or adjustment, my father continued to act badly, so she called him Dog. Still he wandered, coming home long after midnight, so my mother purposefully left Mr. in the garage, loaded and waiting like a missile. And when Dad would finally open that garage door to slip inside the house, out would bolt big goofy Mr., wild and free, sprung like my father off from home. Mr. crossed boundaries he did not belong, through backyards, laundry lines, taking the time to roll in some stinking mess. And my father, exhausted from his own romps, chased and chased that dog through the neighborhood for a good hour. My mother laughed, cloaked behind curtains, watching my father and Mr. Gourdine zigzag the yards in early dawn. Next came a new dog, a sweet, doe-eyed, purebred German Shepherd with registered papers. My mother carried her home in a basket and set her to the floor where we, my brother and sisters and I, oohed and awed over the puppy who replaced Mr., who became too big, too strong to stay. A female, a bitch, my mother whispered. What should we call her? You won't have to come up with a name, my mother informed. Her name is Mistress. It's on the papers here. Mistress! Mistress, we called, racing through that house. My father came home to find us beaming in love with a puppy licking our faces. Mistress! Mistress, we screamed, running past my father when he came in the door, and my mother simply smiled, poised and serene, while my father tried to gather his composure, standing there with his coat half on and his fedora tilted like a question mark. There was nothing he could do in response. In time, the puppies that followed became more specific. All females, all bitches, and each carried the message my mother was aware, and we would set up the gleeful screams of my father's newest. Miss Brown! Miss Brown! My mother warred this way for over a decade, and her children never knew until they had dogs of their own. Oh. This is how you fight what can never be won. This is how you let war rage in a house of children, in a house of dogs. That's a true story. I didn't put it together until we were really grown that we understood exactly what that all meant. So, this is poems like that. I want to write poems like that night I saw the stranger come at me, hand out, palm open, like I should perch there like a sparrow. I took that one hand that led to the dance floor. My big sister's red dress fit me like I was her, all grown and knowing what to do when a man comes forward to take your hand. It was salsa, the quick-footed dance, on the balls of your feet, heels hardly touching ground, that kind of salsa you only find uptown, the quick dance. Let the man drive, let him drive forward, backwards, turning the spin of your dress, until people in the way move out the way, song after song, seamless, 'cause salsa don't quit. We were so pretty, so smooth, as if we had danced before, had met at the bodega, sat by the river trading grins, ran up flights to bang on each other's door, shoulder to shoulder on the subway for a matinee downtown and a hot dog later, everyone clear who belonged to whom. Me in my sister's dress, he using the moves passed down from father, brothers, us, both grown to startling, just for that one night, that one of a kind, never dance like that again night of a stranger who spun me into poem. And this piece here was commissioned to be written for Martin Luther King's birthday. And you know, I have a problem with writing occasional poems, you know, they come out so insipid and a little thin. But it gave me memory, you know. And so here's the life and times of that. This is called Under the Influence of Love. After the death of MLK, we grew afros so high, they fell like souffles. In the black light basement parties, we danced close and hard, swaying. James Brown, stylistics, the chai lights, the OJs, the dramatics, the slow pulse love songs, rhythm and beats limbered our hips, showing off our latest moves, learned that morning on Soul Train. We were unafraid. No violence could reach inside, turn the boys who held us into chalk marks on the street. Even the door broke a sweat from the heat of us. Outside, the revolution was winding down, and we forgot the fight, wanted to forget the smell, fire and blood, the swirl and threat, red lights, blue lights coming at us in the streets, the sound of feet running, hearts pounding upstairs, the fear traded from one generation to the next. We wanted to forget. We were not marching across bridges. We were not sitting at lunch counters while men, boys threw soda and fists at us. We were walking to house parties, later fetching rides to White Castle, sipping on Annie Green Springs, Thunderbird, the tail ends of joints, fogging up windows and parked cars with our love. We spent hours playing out those songs, our arms layered in bangles laced around the neck of boys who pulled us in, their hands aching to wander, to arc our asses in the way they palm basketballs just that afternoon. It was settled. We didn't have to be mad or crouched no more. We were fly. Black mayors in Newark, Atlanta, Detroit. We were fine. Johnson Products, the first black-owned company on the U.S. Stock Exchange. We were foxy. Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Beverly Johnson, Patricia Roberts Harris. And we were bad, hitting 175 home runs, winning Wimbledon, and taking 8 nights to show roots. And without a dime or a plan, we believed it was settled. The revolution had been won and laid down. Lower than the bass in Barry White's voice. Pay attention to the love touch. Nothing can hurt you now. And of course we're wrong. This piece here was written in the 80s. I think it's fine for me to bring this one out, you know. This one was written in the 80s when Reagan was threatening Roe v. Wade, and we did a we did a sit down that lasted for well over a month. I'd say maybe 2 months in protest. and we would work in shifts. And it got to the point there at one point where all of our menstrual cycles, so at a given point, what we would do is they'd say, okay, we're gonna have a potluck, and everybody was bringing, premenstrual food, chips, salt, candy, But, so I was asked to write a suite of poems in protest for it, and this thing got buried for, a couple of decades. And then Texas started its noise, and then the Supreme Court then overturned Roe, and then we got the dogs. And so it came out, it's relevant. I did a little research to write this piece, and this is called They'll Climb Trees. Any way but the safe way, as long as they don't see. Dirty utensils that probe seem even sharper and filthier in our fear. The homemade way will be called upon. We'll dig up the old ways, eager to believe in an ancestor's knowledge, anxious to hold faith in the methods of our sisters from World War II New England. We'll remember how and teach our children. Let them watch and listen to long whispered counseling sessions between women cornered and smelling of fear. They'll come to recognize the trapped, hurried phone calls in the middle of the night. The pieces of paper balled up and pressed into palms, an address, a recipe, passed along and altered by strangers like some new diet clipped from a magazine, and the children won't tell ghost stories at slumber parties anymore. It will be real harder. The bone-chilling don't ever get caught like that brutal stories about them. Women with coat hangers in their abdomens, bleeding in hospital corridors at 2 a.m., women burned by chemicals mixed in bathroom sinks, and the pastes, once made for fun by children in mud puddles, are serious mixtures of mashed ants and gunpowder for the womb. That lady screaming on the next block allowed boiling water poured on her belly after finding no results from the pounding of stones. After bloodletting hot baths, douching electric shocks, and the jumping off of chairs, we'll come upon a book on China and try the taste of quicksilver before swallowing so quickly. Before the laws of ancient Assyria come to pass, when the women scarred from botched abortions are tried, convicted, damned, and impaled upon stakes, left without burial, let us quickly slip out to the high sacred oak tree where we played as girls. In the moonlight, bright enough for me to see, I'll watch you climb into its great arms, to stand upon its highest, strongest limb, and we will count softly, 1, 2, 3, and see how it goes. I guess I'll take you into the prison. After for over 10 years I've been students, 10 years in the prisons, men, women, and children. Then I put myself through graduate school doing that. And then I come to ARC and I have 17 weeks, yeah. And I had a dream that I broke these guys out, and I would take them to readings and gallery openings, and I wouldn't know how to get them back again. It wasn't until a while later that I realized what that dream truly meant. That me being in that place doing that work was breaking them out, and they could never come back in again. So this is called The Dream. You have to see the show, you guys. That's what I said to the crowd of men in blue. I'm going to take you there tonight. They were obedient men, all of those criminals. They stood around me like great dark trees. They believed everything I said. There was no question. I keep my word. So that night I snuck out 14 inmates from the state pen. We went to the theater or an art opening. Maybe it was a bookstore or cafe with a rollicking reader. Everyone behaved. They kept their hands to themselves. Nobody sneered. Here's the bad word. Said fuck or sniffed the neck of a hostess. They milled around the crowd, lifting their chins to look down their noses at the way light hit canvas. They held the stems of wine glasses gently between fingers, remembering it wasn't a 40 in a paper bag. They even sat politely in chairs, just like you all, and said, when the poem ended. I was right, they said. It was a really great show. Out on the sidewalk as the venue closed down, they stood there with their hands in their pockets, waited for what came next. They looked at me for an answer. How do I get them back inside? I had no clue. So I stashed them all in an empty barn full of hay, damp dark, until I could figure it out. They promised to wait. They said they were good at it. I went home. The next day was a different prison. Hey, you guys, you have to see this show. I broke them out too, and man, they had a good time. The artists, the actors, the poets, the host, whoever it was, planned that event beamed. Usually only 5 people would come, mainly family, a dutiful wife, a smitten new lover, an unruly child on the verge of a tantrum, a student in need of extra credit. The men clapped softly, kept their state-issued shoes from clattering the floor. They laughed without throwing their fists in the air. True gentlemen. Again, out on the sidewalk, they made a huddle and ignored the Saturday night traffic, the flick and flicker of bar lights, the curl and lift of laughter in the night. How to get back in again was their concern, but I still had no answer. I took them to the barn in the green empty field and stashed them away with the others. When I opened those great doors, men were seated on bales, calm as pigeons in the rafters. Each and every one had stayed there as I had left them. The others wandered inside, made room for themselves. They met the dark with ease. They nodded, smiled, took a kneel and wait. I went home again. Every week I broke more out, never brought them back to the prisons we so easily scaled. Okay.
Or we can do questions.
Okay, here's the very first poem I ever wrote. I was asked to write in one act. I first started off as a short story fiction writer, and then I went into plays, started writing plays, stripped of my narrative and only dialogue to move the thing. And then come, will you write us one act? Sure, no problem. And then they come at me and say, write some poems. We don't have time for one. You know, people, when they hear that you're a writer, they take, they give you orders like you're a taco stand or something. I said, why not? So I wrote this. My best friend's name was Barbara. We would have a great time, But the only problem is that she always ate with her mouth open. And it was awful, So I thought, okay, here's my first poetry reading. Let me write a poem. Barbara will be there. She'll hear this. She'll go, oh shit. So what I did was I gender switched it and put it in with a woman, a man and a woman in a relationship. Barbara didn't get it. But I had people pull me aside and say, I'm getting ready to get married. Can I have a copy of that? So this is called Why He Eats Alone. Sometimes she could see the food turning in his mouth when he ate. She would stare directly at it, how it turned like a cement mixture until she knew it was what annoyed her most about him. She never pointed it out, letting him irritate her until she refused to take her meals with him. She ate by the sink, over the pots, with her back to him. There were times when she could not stand the sounds, saliva wetting down his food, lips slicked with grease. She would smile at him. No, go ahead, baby, I ain't hungry. Yet with her back to him and the radio on a bit too loud, she could still hear and see the hole he made in his face how he rolled food in it, churning meals into a great paste. After he pushed his plate away, a heavy, thick tension rose from her shoulders and her jaws would go slack. 3 meals a week, 3 meals a day, 21 meals a week. One day, after lasagna, she left him abruptly, saying only that she met someone new and how horribly, terribly sorry she was. He always knew love was complex. She came to know it was little things that mattered. Here's the truth to that. Here's the truth to that one. Okay, here's the close. Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna go home and say, I should have heard that. But anyway. This is from the boys' prison. What I know about love poems but haven't written. It was this kid in the lockup of O.H. Close, smooth-skinned Chicano, dressed in a stylish way. He came to class every time, made little waves, sat silent in the harangue until he asked, "Say, yo, can you teach us some love poems? 'Cause I have this girl out there and I signed up for this class, you know, so I could write some love poems to keep her where I left her." I threw some Neruda his way as a start. He stole a corner away from the others, crouched low, gripped his pencil like it was a pickaxe. 2 weeks later, he's back with a flickering jaw. Wrote those poems at her, but she won't write back. I wrote my soul, my heart, my tears, my lips, my arms. I wrote she my Azteca princess, my rock bottom girl of my dreams. But she don't write me back. Said it like I sold him a car that won't roll. So I tell him like this, in the same way I told the men who crowded my elbow in Folsom, the duel at Vacaville. Your Azteca princess, your black queen, Nubian love, is trying to cash a check on the corner while a baby squirms in her arms. She's stuck in the rain at the bus stop when the rent's due $20 short and the neighbors are on round 15 upstairs, loving and fighting, fighting and loving, and the TV's broke, the toilet sings, the lights flicker, and your sad ass is locked up. She's not feeling like an Azteca princess. Black queen, Nubian love. She feels like Teresa with a toothache, like Marie, Evie, Tarfia in a cold, empty bed, watching the clock spin out more to stand. So write this. The moment the slope of her neck looks like the softest place to kiss. How she stands in doorways with that exact smile that's only hers. How she opens her arms to each child, your child, and how she alone can make the shadow shine when she crosses a room. Can you write what her name feels like? An oath, a promise, a full-throated song with a note that sweetens the mouth. Can you spell out her moments of silence, the truth in her eyes, when she turns to you? Do that, and she will write you back, and write you back, and write you back. Thank you. Can I ask a question? Does anybody have a question?
I do.
Okay.
When you wrote letters to Quincy, did you guys do it old school, snail mail, or were they emails?
Emails. It was 2005, and we were always late, and every single one of our letters said, "Sorry, it's taken me so long to respond." Okay? Yes.
This is a little bit of an abstract question, but so I just began stage managing, assistant directing a woman show with a script that's kind of very poetic in nature. And my friend, who is starring in it. She's a wonderful actress, but we've been studying Shakespeare and things like that, and she says she has trouble hearing the rhythm of poetry.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give of someone who's struggling to hear the syllables and phrases?
Right.
Yeah.
For me, I always hated poetry. Hated it. Didn't understand any of it. It was like bull for me. And when I was asked to write for that little venue that canceled the one act, I thought, okay, here's the poem. Now, how do I read this thing? You know, because I had been put in front of poets that would read with their hair in their face and mumble into the thing. You know, it was agony. It was torture. Hated it. You know. I turned the television on and I happened to see Maya Angelou, Lena Horne, and Roscoe Lee Brown reading Langston Hughes. And I go, that's it, that's poetry. And I watched Maya Angelou's throat. And I realized that what she did was she keeps her throat open so that she lets the air ride up and down in there, right? So tell her to watch videos, watch poetry. And you can see, I mean, and the poets that move her, right? And the poets that move her. It's the breath. That's what it's about. So, Endazake Shange for colored girls, not the one with Janet Jackson in it. The one with Endazake in it. Who else? Who else is good?
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh,
Hi, Judy.
Hey, I was curious who commissioned you to write the MLK piece?
City of Davis.
Huh?
City of Davis. Gotta get a black woman up here to read this. They had Julia Levine, who's the poet laureate of Davis. And she, you know, kind of excused herself a little bit. You know, said, I'm a Jewish white lady, I don't know. You know, so she, you know, so. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. Thank you so much, you guys, for coming.